Good evening and welcome to the ICAS Winter Symposium Special 2022. I'm Shinja Kim, President and Chair of ICAS, and I would like to thank everyone for joining our program today. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Ambassador John R. Bolton. Ambassador Bolton will address today's virtual symposium with particular emphasis on the Korean Peninsula issues and the U.S. national security. Ambassador John R. Bolton served as Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs from April 9, 2018 until his resignation on September 10, 2019. Prior to that, John served 11 years as a Senior Fellow at American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. from January 2007 until April 2018. He was appointed as U.S. Permanent Representative to the UN on August 1, 2005, and served until his resignation in December 2006. Prior to his appointment, Ambassador Bolton served as Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security for 4 years from May of 2001 to 2005. Throughout his distinguished career, John has been a staunch defender of American interests. While Undersecretary of State, he repeatedly advocated tough measures against the nuclear weapons programs of both Iran and North Korea and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction worldwide. John led negotiations for America to withdraw from the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty so that the Bush administration could proceed with the National Missile Defense Program. John is the author of The Room Where It Happened, Surrender is Not an Option, Defending America at the UN and Abroad, and How Barack Obama is Endangering Our National Sovereignty. Ambassador Bolton was born in Baltimore, Maryland. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree and summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa from Yale College in 1970, and received his Juris Doctor from Yale Law School in 1974. And John currently resides in Maryland with his wife, Gretchen. So with that brief introduction, it is my honor to present Ambassador John Bolton here this evening, and hope you enjoy the program, and let's welcome Ambassador Bolton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to be here and to see all of you, even if only virtually. Pretty soon we'll get past this, at least I hope so, and get back to old-fashioned meeting in person. But we'll make do with what we have to in the circumstances. Obviously, there are a lot of people participating who know a lot about the subject matter, so I won't try and repeat much of what everybody watching probably already knows. I'll just try and lay out at the outset very briefly what I think the current state of play is on the peninsula, obviously, particularly with regard to North Korea's nuclear weapons threat and its general threat to peace and security in the region. And what I think we should understand better, the connection between North Korea's role in Northeast Asia and more broadly with China's overall global strategy, something I think we've neglected in the past, frankly, something I hadn't thought as much about 20 years ago as I've thought since then, but which I think is increasingly important. So let me just start off on this question of the principal question, the immediate question we all face all the time, the North Korean nuclear weapons program. And as I said in my book, the way this issue has been handled for 30 years now reminded me of Winston Churchill's famous comment in the 1930s when he talked about the confirmed unteachability of mankind, of doing the same thing over and over again and not achieving the desired results. You know, we've had 30 years of failed negotiations with North Korea, 30 years of failed pressure tactics, 30 years of people saying it's unacceptable for North Korea to get deliverable nuclear weapons. And after 30 years, we're at the point where they've got nuclear weapons, which are deliverable in a number of ways on tramp steamers or carried over the border in pieces from Mexico. And they're getting very close to an ICBM and or hypersonic missile capability that at some point will have re-entry capable vehicles and adequate targeting to hit cities in the United States or any place on the planet. So after 30 years, we can say that all of us who have worked in different ways and perhaps with different viewpoints to stop North Korea from getting nuclear weapons have failed, or have failed almost at the last point, which ought to teach us something and illuminates what I think are the very few options that remain to us. Here's the central point that I would make that covers the last 30 years. In all of these discussions, in everything that transpired during that period, there was never once convincing evidence that North Korea had made a strategic decision to give up nuclear weapons. They were prepared to commit to give up nuclear weapons. They've done it multiple times, verbally and in writing. They're certainly prepared to negotiate for the relief from economic sanctions or to get tangible economic benefits. But when it comes to following through on their commitment to give up their nuclear weapons program, somehow it just never happens. And that's because they don't want to. And that's something we should recognize, because that colors every other possible option available to us. I think the current state of American policy is de facto a return to strategic patience from the Obama administration, operating in part under what I think is the mistaken influence that the regime in North Korea does provocative things so it can get attention, and that if we deny them attention, they will be somehow less threatening. I never understood the theory. I don't understand it now. It failed under Obama. It will fail under Biden. There was talk for a long time. Trump kept saying they're not launching ballistic missiles. They're not testing nuclear weapons. More recently, people have said they're not testing missiles, which conversation ended, I think, in January when they did 7 missile tests. I've written what I think about this. Sometimes a missile test is just a missile test. You do it when you need to. You don't need it. You don't do it when you don't need to. I wouldn't read political significance into everything the North Koreans have done. I do know that time is on the side of the proliferator, and every day that goes by, whatever they're doing, whether we see it or not, they're getting closer to that deliverable nuclear weapons capability. So I don't think any progress, quote unquote, was made under Trump. I don't think any progress was made under 8 years of strategic patience. And I don't think any progress has been made this past year in achieving the thing that we all say we want, which is not to prevent North Korea from getting nuclear weapons. As for South Korea, the boys and girls are still looking for sunshine. Look up, wait for sunshine to happen, bring sweetness and light to the peninsula. It's going to be a long wait, I think. Obviously, now we're all waiting for the results of the presidential election in South Korea. There are people on the call, I'm sure, far more expert than I am in what the prospective chances of the various candidates are. But I think until we see the outcome, it's really, there's for the next couple months, with all other things being equal, not much is going to happen there. But I think we also have to look to the larger international political environment, and I think it's very much a mixed picture at this point. I think we've got looming over everything. If you look at Central and Eastern Europe today, if you look at Taiwan and the South China Sea, what I think is the catastrophic strategic decision to withdraw from Afghanistan has had a profound effect in Beijing and Moscow and other places. I think we can't calculate the full effect of it, but I think it's devastatingly negative for the United States, and will continue to be felt for quite some time. I don't want to divert attention into what's going on with Putin. I don't think at the moment, I don't think his focus is only Ukraine. I think he's got a broader strategic focus, including splitting NATO, which is doing a pretty good job on its own of not staying united. But if there's a catastrophe in Ukraine, if Putin gets away with a partial annexation of the rest of Ukraine with no effective U.S. or Western opposition, I think that's another catastrophic blow to our credibility worldwide. I think in the Indo-Pacific, obviously of most immediate concern to Korea, China is as hegemonic in its ambitions as it's been in a long time. I think some steps have been taken to counter that. I think the new Quad, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States is a plus. I think AUKUS with Australia, Great Britain, and the U.S. is a plus. I think China is clearly increasingly worried about the U.S. presence in South Korea and Japan, quite apart from everything else they're worried about. And I don't think we've got and haven't had for quite some number of years effective U.S. leadership in the Indo-Pacific. I say that on a bipartisan basis, Democrat and Republican administrations. But I think this is where the China role becomes very important, because I know people will say, well, what's your recommendation to deal with North Korea? And I think at least one thing we can do, if you could get agreement within the United States, is to make China the center of focus. Without China's support, without its shipment of oil and other fuels to North Korea, without its economic lifeline, the regime would fall very, very quickly. China spent 30 years saying, yeah, we're concerned about the North Korean nuclear weapons program. Let us mediate with you, and let's talk about how all of us outside the other members of the six-party talks are so concerned about what's going on in North Korea. And we've acted like they're, another disinterested party looking for the right solution to this troubling issue. I think China is a major part of the issue. I think they benefit from North Korea's rogue state status. They know they don't have anything to worry about. They could, as I say, take the steps that would effectively change the regime and end the nuclear program if they wanted to. We've got to make North Korea one of the central issues in the U.S.-China relationship, which is, of course, going downhill steadily, and I don't expect this will contribute to making it better. But until China is held to account for its history with North Korea and its present posture with respect to the peninsula as a whole, I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to get any kind of serious response from Pyongyang. So I'm very worried. I think after 30 years, we are essentially at the point of failure. One other thing I'd like to say is, for all those people who for years have said it's not acceptable for North Korea to have nuclear weapons, but weren't willing to take other steps, weren't willing to consider the use of force, weren't willing to consider regime change, are you going to be held to account when North Korea has deliverable nuclear weapons that can hit any target they want in the United States? That's what Winston Churchill, I think, had in mind when he quoted the ancient Roman story about the confirmed unteachability of mankind. So on that note, I'll stop. I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. Joe Bosco.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, John. It's great to see you again. My question relates to your involvement in the whole effort to get North Korea to denuclearize. You were very instrumental in pushing the maximum pressure campaign, and I think that was meeting with some initial success until it was eventually abandoned. Do you think there's any prospect of its being revived under the Biden administration? Do you think they're capable of carrying out a maximum pressure campaign?
Well, Joe, nice to see you. I don't think the Trump administration was capable of carrying out a maximum pressure campaign. Sanctions, I've dealt a lot with this issue of sanctions going back to the first Bush administration after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, when we passed Resolution 665, which was the most comprehensive system of international sanctions ever imposed anywhere. And I've dealt with sanctions in a whole range of different contexts. And one thing I've learned is that announcing massive sanctions is not the end of the process. It's barely the beginning of the process. Every country that's sanctioned looks for ways to get around it. So it's a constant offense and defense proposition. And if you want sanctions to have effect. If you want to exert maximum pressure, you've got to be relentless in enforcement measures. You've got to be just as creative as the country you're sanctioning. As they find ways to evade the sanctions, you find ways to counter that. It's a continuous, endless process until the regime gives you the result you want. And that's not the way we handled sanctions in the Trump administration. It's not the way sanctions were handled previously, and it's certainly not the way sanctions are being handled now. So in a way, an ineffective sanctions program is the worst of all worlds, because people think, well, they're doing something. They're taking some steps to deal with the problem, when in fact the steps are ineffective. I'll just give you one example near the end of my time in the Trump administration, which I know has been continuing since then, is the so-called ship-to-ship transfers of coal or oil coming in or going out, and other goods where it's happening somewhere off the coast of North Korea. We could find it if we wanted to. Are we willing to stop it? Are we willing to do what we did in the case of the sanctions against Iraq, to board ships if necessary? Couldn't get it done in the Trump administration. I don't think we'll get it done in the Biden administration. I think if you look at what the Biden administration is doing, trying to get back into the Iraq 2015 nuclear deal, sanctions are eroding in Iran, with China in particular buying significant quantities of oil. And I think this is what happens if people don't think you're serious. The sanctions weaken very, very quickly. And so I think North Korea, obviously they're not where they want to be, but they're doing better than they were a year ago, better than they were doing 2 years ago.
Thank you. Inbom Chan.
Good morning, Sungju.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Mr. Bolton, I actually read your book a couple of times, and as a Korean, it was really scary. So how do you feel about South Korea having nuclear weapons so that in the end we can negotiate with the North Koreans to denuclearize? Thank you.
Well, I'm always glad to meet somebody who may be harder line than I am. I have a very simple view about nuclear weapons. I don't think any other country ought to get them. I'd like to find ways. My ideal world is not that dissimilar from those who want total global nuclear disarmament. They don't want any country to have nuclear weapons. My position is very close to that. I only want one country to have nuclear weapons because it's the only one I trust. I happen to be sitting in it. I don't think the answer is for South Korea or Japan to get nuclear weapons. I think the answer is to stop the North Korean program, because proliferation, by definition, encourages others to get nuclear weapons. And that's why North Korea, in part, is not simply a threat in Northeast Asia, but as a desperately poor country, it will sell that technology or maybe even entire weapons to anybody with the hard currency to buy it. They may already be doing it. They know how this works. They benefited in the early days of their program, as probably you all know, from the AQ-Con proliferation network. And entrepreneurial folks in North Korea might well be duplicating that now. So I understand why having a deterrent capability in South Korea would be attractive, but I think it raises the risks that are already high on the peninsula. And I hope people would trust the United States enough, and I understand why they may not, but that they would understand and trust us enough to think we really do mean to say we will not accept a nuclear North Korea.
Thank you. Sean Creamer? Sean Creamer? If not, Joe Detronic,
I'm here,
go
sir.
ahead.
Ambassador
Sean,
Bolton,
go ahead.
thank you for your service to the nation and your comments here tonight. And just looking at the pressure campaign of the last administration and over the years of your service and senior roles in the government, how would you rate the options presented by the military to support our senior national decision-making? And if it fell short, in what ways? And how can the military better support advancing our national our national objectives? Thank you.
You mean broadly or just with respect to North Korea?
Sir, with respect to North Korea, but also if you have any opinions of broadly.
Yeah. Well, I think part of our problem is, and has been beginning in the Obama administration and continuing through the Trump administration, the idea that we are going to concentrate all of our efforts on China, from the pivot to China, the pivot to Asia, whatever formulation you want to use. It means that somehow what happens in other parts of the world, or what happens in Asia, other than directly pertinent to China, is of secondary importance. So, as one example, in the Trump administration, and this was done before I arrived, so I take no credit for it, although I certainly thought it was a good thing. They did a national security strategy that listed the top priorities at the strategic level being Russia and China, and the next priorities more at the tactical level being the proliferation issues of Iran and North Korea. And when I would speak with very, very senior people at the Pentagon about doing more about North Korea, such as thinking of ways to interdict these ship-to-ship transfers, I heard things like, but that's a fourth level priority. So you have Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Somehow I thought it was a top priority, a little bit different from Russia and China, but more immediate in some ways. And yet they'd say fourth priority, we don't have the resources to devote to it. I'd have to say, while there are many, many good people at the Pentagon that I dealt with, I think that it's learned how to game the system very effectively. And there are things that they don't want to do, and options that are not things they want to do don't get presented the right way. I'm not saying the Defense Department's the only agency guilty of that. You're all familiar with Henry Kissinger's jokes about the State Department. You got three options for any problem: do nothing, launch immediate all-out nuclear war, or third option is negotiate. State Department recommends option 3. I mean, this is bureaucratic behavior, but it has been a problem from the Defense Department, certainly in my experience.
Thank you. Joe Detrani, please.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you for your great service and your excellent comments today. My question on North Korea, you mentioned the 7 launches of missiles in January, and we've seen in the Security Council where China and Russia are not supportive of moving forward with sanctions. So what do you see when we talk about a better approach to containing and deterring North Korea? Obviously, we want denuclearization, but in the interim, we need to contain and deter them. What would you propose?
Well, in part, I would elaborate more on my idea to put China at the center of this conversation, and to put more pressure on them in terms of how the United States approaches China with respect to North Korea. It should be more of a bilateral issue in the U.S.-China discussion, and that without doing that, without putting pressure on the single most to North Korea, the single most important country in the world for them, I don't think we have much of a chance. I think that the tacit and not so tacit support China has given over the years is the only thing that keeps that regime alive. I don't think North Korea is ever going to make a strategic decision to give up nuclear weapons. So I think there are the options we should be looking for really is to rethink our own policy on reunification of the peninsula. That was our objective in 1945. This temporary division it is unnatural, just as it's a very different environment to be sure, but just as the division of Germany was unnatural. German reunification was going to happen at some point. The only question was how. And I think Korean reunification is going to happen at some point. That's one way to get rid of North Korea's nuclear program. Is it possible to have a discussion with China about that? Probably not under present circumstances, but I think this is the alternative we've got to present. The regime in North Korea has called the tune for a long time, and I think changing the dimensions of the problem are very important. I'd say there's another aspect to this as well, and I understand the controversy here. I've experienced it myself. It's been a long time U.S. objective, but I'll just say it because I think it's important among friends to be candid. We've got to find a way to get better trilateral cooperation among South Korea, Japan, and the United States. I'm not going to make a long argument for it. I think everybody knows the history. We know the circumstances we're in. We'll have to see again what the South Korean presidential election brings. But we're in a strategic environment now where we need to take a long look at things. And the United States isn't great at long-term planning. We're good on quarterly reports and that sort of thing. But this question of the relationship of the powers in Northeast Asia is critical for everybody's security. And I would welcome creative thoughts. I know a lot of people have thought a lot about this issue, and it remains controversial, but that doesn't mean it's any less important to try and make progress on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Haas.
Thank you, Ambassador, for being here. My name is Tim Haas. I reside in Pennsylvania. I'm a Korean American, U.S. citizen. My question has to do with the role of South Korea in respect to China. Lately, or decade or so, South Korea has been maintaining a great working relationship with all superpowers, namely the United States, Russia, and China. And as this tension continued to rise between the United States and China over the issues in the East that you are so describing, what role should South Korea take with China?
Well, I think it's obviously in a difficult position given the economic relationships with China. So is the United States. So are almost all of us. But the kind of struggle that's going to go on with China, I think, for the rest of this century covers the whole range of activity: economic, political, and military. And in fact, the one, I thought, contribution that Trump made on that score was bringing to the attention of people in the United States issues like the extent to which China has benefited from stealing intellectual property from the rest of the world to help fuel its economic growth. And it's a phenomenon that continues today. In all the trade disputes that Trump helped create with Japan and Europe, with all of our friends, every one of them said that, and including South Korea. I mean, he didn't discriminate. He got in trade disputes with essentially everybody except our adversaries. Every one of them said, "Look, can we just find a way to resolve this, but put it aside so we can all cooperate together on the problems caused by China through the theft of intellectual property, reverse engineering, discrimination against foreign investors and traders in China, the preference given by the Chinese government on political basis of allocation of capital decisions inside China that works against us, a whole range of issues, the manipulation of the WTO by China's mercantilist international economic policy." I mean, there is near universal agreement about China's conduct internationally here. And so we've all got a stake in getting that fixed. That's going to put all of us in a difficult position because of that economic relationship. But if we don't correct it now, what are our chances of correcting it 20 years from now when China is likely to be much stronger? And I think this ties in with the military and political aspects as well. If you look at the Southeast Asian countries in particular, I think they stand to benefit economically as investment in China unwinds and people look for other ways to source elements of their supply chain. But they're obviously very worried about their security situation. Vietnam in particular, I think now increasingly the Philippines, certainly many other ASEAN countries, and India most particularly. So I don't think South Korea is isolated here at all. I think this is should be part of a larger effort. And in South Korea's case, for obvious reasons, it involves very heavy security issues too. And I wouldn't discount the risk that South Korea faces. There are a lot of countries on China's periphery that face threats. Taiwan is the biggest target at the moment, but nobody's exempt from it. So I just think we've got to adjust our thinking to the new approach that we are beginning to appreciate China's been taking. I actually don't think this is new. I think in part we have misread what happened in China with the reforms of Deng Xiaoping. I think we hoped for too much. We hoped that increased wealth in China through market-oriented reforms would make it more democratic. That obviously hasn't happened. We thought it would make China more responsible internationally. That hasn't happened. So when the basic premises of your policy turn out not to be working, it'd be helpful to revise your policy. And I put America squarely at the center of the mistake we've been making. But I think we've all been making it in ways, and this is a signal not for American withdrawal. This is a signal for more American engagement, so that countries affected can work together on it.
Okay. Dennis Halpin, go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton, for your comments. Following up on what Mr. Haas said about China and your comments, I was wondering, especially now, it seems more probable than it did 5 years ago, not only that we'd have a war in Europe with the Ukraine, but also a Chinese move against Taiwan. My question is, what do you think South Korea would do in the event if there was a confrontation in the Taiwan Strait? Do you think like U.S. forces stationed in Korea would be able to respond, and would South Korea give more support to its ally, or try to kind of just finesse the issue and stay out of the conflict?
Well, I'm probably not as good as predicting or giving you an answer on that question as some others on the call. I'll slide back and say it depends in part on the next election, that's for sure. But I think it's a mistake to think you can feed the crocodiles one by one and not be at risk yourself. I think we hear obviously what Beijing says about Taiwan. They've been saying it for a long time. I think, as many others have concluded, it's time to shed strategic ambiguity because I think it contributes to more instability than stability. It may have been the right way to go when it was put in place. I think it's past its sell-by date, and I think what we should be doing is making it clear that there's an unacceptable cost for China if it does try anything with Taiwan. I think this is something that could be facilitated by the presence of American forces there of some kind, home porting vessels. And I do think this is a case where deterrence can work. I don't think China wants a war over Taiwan. I don't think they want to pick up an island full of smoking rubble. I think they want it to fall into their lap like a piece of ripe fruit. And I think they believe the way that will happen is they create some kind of threat, some kind of crisis, and they wait and see if the United States backs down. Amazingly, at least I think it's amazingly, this happened in the late 1990s with a heavy buildup along the coast of Fujian province. And Bill Clinton, for goodness sake, sent 2 carrier battle groups steaming toward the island. The crisis ended. In speaking around the United States, I've asked people during the Obama administration and now during the Biden administration, how many of you think either one of them would send a carrier battle group or 2 steaming toward Taiwan? And nobody ever raises his or her hand. As soon as Xi Jinping thinks he can make the threat and get away with it, I think he'll try it. If he thinks he's not going to get away with it, I don't think he's going to take the risk. So as I say, I think deterrence can work here, but we're not, and obviously we want to avoid the conflict to begin with, but I don't think the current deterrent posture on Taiwan is adequate. I think that's why people quite rightly are worried as China watches very closely what's happening in Eastern Europe and as they observed in Afghanistan, for its implications in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly with respect to Taiwan.
Thank you. Sid Hecker.
Yes, Ambassador Bolton, thank you for sharing your thoughts this morning. I've got 2 questions. One is, well, first of all, let me agree with you that all 3 administrations, the last 3 administrations have failed on North Korea. And you seem to indicate that the reason was that people were not willing to consider military or regime change options. And you actually said that those people should be held to account. Well, you were there in 2 administrations in very influential positions. So what happened? What happened during those times? So that's question 1.
Can I answer question 1 before we go to?
Go ahead. Yeah. Then I'll go on to number 2. Thank you.
Well, I mean, one answer is I like to say in the Trump administration, I was the national security advisor, not the national security decision maker. So you can only do what you can do. But more substantively, people would say over and over again, and they were very sincere about it. They didn't want North Korea to get nuclear weapons, but say, we've still got time. We can negotiate. And every time a new Secretary of State would come in, or a new president, or a new national security advisor, they'd look at the mess they had inherited on North Korea, and people would lay out the unattractive options, and they'd say, I don't know, I've got a few thoughts here. Let's negotiate some more. So we negotiated for 30 years, and here we are.
Okay, so actually, you said you weren't the decision maker, but yes, you made very clear in your book, in the room, you were very influential in the decisions that were made. But let me turn to the second question.
I see my propaganda skills haven't diminished.
No, it was incredible. I learned such an enormous amount, from the book. I mean, some of it I didn't like much, but I really learned a lot. So it was very useful. The second one related to diplomacy, which you just dismiss as not having a chance at all. But certainly, in the spirit of what's happened, not only in North Korea, but other places, one at least needs to assess the diplomatic options as such. So as diplomatic options are put forth, one assesses as to what chance they might have. So for example, you made it very clear in your book in Hanoi. So the diplomatic possibility was shutting down Yongbyon, and you made it very clear that one can't, that was not worthwhile to pursue. But there were other diplomatic options through the Kim-Trump letters. And the one I'm particularly interested in is the September 6, 2018 letter. And you discussed that in your book as how you and Pompeo and Kelly went to see President Trump on September 10th to discuss the letter. And in the book, you discussed those aspects of all the flattering comments and so forth, that Kim made to get the Trump's ego. What you didn't discuss was that Kim also, in that letter, said, look, he's willing to look at a complete shutdown of the Nuclear Weapons Institute. You didn't mention that in your book, and I'm just curious, what is the Nuclear Weapons Institute, and what, if anybody, looked at as to what that might mean from a diplomacy standpoint? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think that term occurred in a couple of places, and it was never defined by the North Koreans. I would say, I won't speak for anybody else, I understood it to be a general reference to their entire program. The reason that it never went anywhere was one thing that we did in the negotiations, and it's fairly standard in arms control talks of all kinds of varieties, is to agree on what you're trying to get done. You have to start with a baseline declaration, and this is a test of trust and capacity of the parties negotiating to see how far this is going to go. It's always difficult in arms control. Verification and compliance based on that baseline declaration, though, are pretty important. And the North Koreans rejected the idea of telling us much of anything. I think one of them said, we're just giving you a target list. But in fact, we know where a lot of them are to begin with. And the test of the baseline declaration was to see what they thought they were hiding. But they clearly were not going to do it. They believed, and in fact, since the Hanoi meeting, there's been a lot of commentary about how surprised Kim Jong-un was that he couldn't make the deal of Yongbyon for sanctions relief, which I think his people had told him was going to succeed. And I'm surprised he's surprised, because the fact is, the reason we took the position we did was that previous efforts at settlement, whether it was the six-party talks, the agreed framework, or a lot of other ideas out there, involving the trade-off of economic pressure being put on by the outside countries on the one hand and the denuclearization effort on the other, are all asymmetrical. The sanctions relief is upfront and immediate and has a huge impact, particularly on a small economy like North Korea. The release from the constraints of the sanctions, or in the case of the agreed framework, the resources that were provided, is a huge stimulus. And it's a signifier of legitimacy that makes it very hard to turn the sanctions back on. Whereas the performance of the denuclearization commitment is of necessity longer and more complicated to do. But to have faith that it would happen, you need a baseline declaration. You need to resolve disputes about what the full components of the program are, and then you have to provide for effective verification and compliance. And North Korea was basically never willing to discuss that in any way that was satisfactory. So that said to me, again and again, they've really still never made a strategic decision to give up nuclear weapons. They're still trying to have the best of both worlds. Now, I understand that as a negotiating tactic, but that's not how you get to yes. And just to revive for a second the famous comparison to Libya, in 2003, 2004, the Libya model was unmistakable that Gaddafi had made a strategic decision to give up nuclear weapons. He was scared to death we were going to overthrow him. He'd seen what happened to Saddam Hussein. The biggest breakthrough came after they found Saddam Hussein in that spider hole. And he, as they say in the defense contracting business, he did open kimono with the UK and the United States on his nuclear and chemical weapons programs, which fortunately were both in pretty primitive shape. There's no evidence that North Korea has ever been at that point. And I think without that assurance and without any kind of significant verification, it was insincere.
Tom Kim, please. Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, for doing this for us. My question is about North Korea. You just mentioned as options as after we have failed for the past 30 years of all kinds of viewpoints and strategies and approaches that the United States has taken. But you didn't mention long-haul shots such as regime change, liberation, or unification. And but more immediately, I think it's interesting to me that you mentioned the China factor. That is that we work and approach North Korean issue through and with the China's cooperation. Of course, there are challenges United States has with the problematic relationship and confrontation with China nowadays. Now, I think you also mentioned in the Libya model and in the past you even discussed the military options such as a preemptive or preventive strikes as well. Now, my question at this point is, what would you recommend for the Biden administration? After 1 year in office, nothing has happened. Their basic position is we wait until North Korea responds to unconditional talks with the United States, but that has not happened, and it does not seem it's going to happen anytime soon. Therefore, what would be your push for the administration, Biden administration, to change its course of action?
Well, on the question of how to engage with China, I mean, I think if we had done this 10 years ago, which is when the idea first occurred to me, it would have been a much more propitious environment with which to negotiate. And we don't have that now. But the argument to China would be, look, you say that you are opposed to a nuclear North Korea because it creates instability in Northeast Asia. And instability in Northeast Asia is negative for China's economic growth. Now, of course, what they mean is Japanese nuclear weapons. That's what they mean in instability in Northeast Asia. But as I said earlier, I agree with that. I don't want anybody else to get nuclear weapons. But if they're sincere that they want North Korea to not to have a nuclear weapons capability, then they can act in one of two ways. One, they can force the regime through economic pressure to give up the program. Or they could, if they wanted a long-term solution, negotiate to reunite the peninsula, reunite the two Koreas. People say, but they want the buffer state between what the North Korea provides against U.S. troops in South Korea. Look, if we're going to have conflict with China, it's not going to occur because American and other forces move north on the Korean Peninsula to China. That's probably the last thing that will happen. The buffer state may have been an argument in 1945. It's not an argument anymore. If they really want stability in Northeast Asia, then they want a non-nuclear Korean peninsula. And the best way to do that is through reunification. That would be my argument. Now, they have concerns that in a destabilized North Korea, they'd get massive refugee flows across the Yalu into China. I think South Korea fears massive refugee flows across the DMZ. This is a problem. There's no doubt about it. It's a problem I think we can work on together to mitigate and minimize. People say, but if Korea is reunited, what happens to the American troops? Are they going to move? They're not going to stay on the 38th parallel. Are they going to move to the Yalu River? China saw that movie in 1950. It didn't like it then, doesn't like it now. Here's the good news. American military planning doesn't want to be on the Yalu River. I mean, in an ideal world, we don't want to be on the 38th parallel either. We'd rather be at the southern part of the peninsula where we're free to deploy elsewhere in Asia, and we're not a tripwire for the North Koreans, whether at the parallel or at the Yalu River. So there's a way to satisfy China's concerns about the risks and dangers of reunification. And I think ultimately, if you had a reunited Korea, you would have a fantastically growing Korean economy. I think South Koreans make a mistake, with all due respect, about the difficulty of the cost of a reunified Korea. I think it's one of the best investment opportunities in the world today. And it would be enormously beneficial to the people of Korea. Now, it may be China says, look, we have absolutely no interest in talking about that. And as I said, 10 years ago, I would have felt better. We could have gotten it off the ground. But I think from a political point of view, internationally, to be able to say to China, we've given you a road to eliminate the nuclear weapons program of North Korea, to bring stability to the Korean peninsula and allow for the free choice of governments by the people of the peninsula, and China said, no, we don't want to discuss it, I'd put that brick in the bottom of China's boat.
William King. William? If not, Don Kirk? If not, Sergey?
Mr. Master, I thought you didn't respond to my latter part of the question. That is, what recommendations or advice you may have for the Biden administration to reduce the threat of North Korean nuclear weapons?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the threat of military action against North Korea's nuclear program is very much on their minds. Now, we're all aware of the significant risks involved in military action, but I think there are a lot of things that could be done to diminish the risks to South Korea and the civilian population of South Korea. and to increase the chances that the use of military force would have the effect of destroying the nuclear weapons program. I think it might also have the effect of bringing the regime down. And indeed, that's one point I would make with China. We can do reunification the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. This can be part of your choice. There's no question that the dangers on the peninsula should weigh heavily in our thinking. But as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford said, I think back in 2017, this is before I joined the administration, he's very aware of the complexity and the military risks on the peninsula. But as he said, my job is to think about defending America. And if we believe what we say, that a nuclear North Korea is unacceptable. Maybe people don't believe that. Maybe people are willing to accept it. I'm not. But for those who continue to say a nuclear North Korea is unacceptable, then if you don't have the military option made as palpable as you can, it's not a question, therefore, you must use it. But if the more viable the option is, the greater the chance that you might persuade China or others to bring the regime down in a more controlled and peaceful fashion.
David.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you for your service and for your great remarks. And I really concur with so much of what you say. And I think just to reinforce, I think we really have a lack of understanding of the nature, objectives, and strategy of the Kim family regime. I think it's important to recognize that nowhere in any party or strategic document has North Korea ever said that they will give up their nuclear weapons. It's one thing to say, to make a statement, but their policy inside North Korea is not to give up nuclear weapons. So I concur with your positions there. And in fact, I'm really heartened to hear you talk about unification, because the only way we're going to see an end to the nuclear program, the military threats, and the human rights abuses committed against the Korean people in the North is through unification and the establishment of what I would call a united Republic of Korea that's secure, stable, non-nuclear, economically vibrant, and unified under a liberal constitutional form of government, based on all of our values: individual liberty, rule of law, human rights. In short, a united Republic of Korea, or UROC. But to get to a question, your remarks seem to imply consideration of a preventative strike against North Korea. And as a former military planner, I would really like to hear, under what conditions would you recommend a preventative strike to prevent, the final development of a deliverable nuclear weapon to the homeland? And broadly speaking, what would be your recommended priority targets? What effects would you expect to be achieved by a preventative strike? And then, of course, lastly, what kind of response would we anticipate from North Korea following a preventative strike?
Well, I don't think you. Yeah, no, thank you. I don't think you can. You get to the preventive strike until you can lay out how to suppress North Korea's offensive capabilities right on the other side of the DMZ. And any strike against any piece of the nuclear enterprise would be accompanied by, or really more likely preceded by, taking out as much of that as you can. So I think it could be accompanied as well by efforts to disrupt the command structure of the North Korean military establishment. I think that would be important. And I think it may take less destructive power against the nuclear enterprise itself than people think, because the consequences of military action, I think, will cause a catastrophic failure in the regime. I understand this is not a pleasant subject for people to think about, but it's not a pleasant subject to contemplate Los Angeles going up under a mushroom cloud. And this regime, people say, well, you shouldn't say it's irrational. It is rational, but it's got, as Vladimir Putin likes to say, they have their own logic, and it's not ours. And besides that, a nuclear North Korea that can sell nuclear devices to other countries is a threat globally, and the rest of the world may not see it, and they may not see it until one is used against them. One of the things that theorists are talking about now in the Russia-Ukraine situation is the possibility Russia would use tactical nuclear weapons. in any kind of confrontation. And it's certainly deja vu for a lot of us, even to think about that sort of thing. I don't like nuclear weapons in the hands of irresponsible people. I just don't. And this regime in Pyongyang is about as irresponsible as you can get. So it's nothing to be undertaken lightly. We're not ready to do it now, that's for sure. And I think this is something that has to be done. But I think the planning for it and the consideration of what your options really are, that may be less than the full up thing that we've been in effect talking about, is something to consider too. But if the North Koreans think we've taken the military option off the table, and I'm afraid that may be their current attitude, they're going to break out the champagne.
Sergey, go ahead.
Yes. Dear Ambassador John Bolton, thank you for your very important talk and answers. Let me ask you a question. Is the United States ready to lift sanctions on North Korea as it moves towards denuclearization on step-by-step basis? What do you think about it?
Well, the Biden administration has not spoken to that, but I believe they would. I think this is the path we've talked about before, even in the Bush 43 administration. It was action for action, which was a formula for failure. It would be again, but look at what they're doing. They've spent a year prostrated on the floor before Iran, banging their forehead into the floor to try and get back into the 2015 nuclear deal. If I were Kim Jong-un, I'd say, as soon as that Iran thing gets taken care of, I'd like to talk to them, because I can follow the same plan. And I do think they would go for action again. And I think the economic benefits of sanctions relief would have an adrenaline-like effect on the economy of North Korea. It won't take much, but they might demolish, as they did in the six-party talks, the cooling tower at Yongbyon, which isn't critical for the functioning of a nuclear reactor. I mean, it was a reverse Potemkin village. They didn't build a fake village; they destroyed a fake. But that is my sense of where the Biden administration would go.
Larry Nix, please.
I think Enid here has had her hand up too for a while, for what it's worth. But let's answer this question first.
Josh?
Ambassador Bolton, can you rule out the possibility that there was some kind of an agreement, undisclosed, obviously, between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, either at Hanoi or at Singapore? I actually, unlike people who toss around terms like maximum pressure, actually watch the designations and the penalties, which are non-existent. And the decline back to the historic lows of the Obama administration in sanctions enforcement is striking and demonstrably true. Was there an agreement that would violate the mandate of Section 104 of the NICS-PIA to designate entities, including Russian and Chinese entities, that are willfully violating the sanctions? And we have done essentially nothing about this since those summits.
Yeah, I think there is zero chance that there was any kind of secret deal in Singapore or Hanoi or anywhere else, because to have the conversation they had, even one-on-one, they need interpreters, and there's no indication that the subject ever came up. So Enid, Enid's had her hand up here, so I feel I've been looking at her on the screen here. I feel badly that she hasn't been able to ask her question.
Enid Adler.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
My friend Sangju, I'm waiting. Okay, I have several questions. I'm listening closely to what you're saying, and you indicated it seems like China in many ways is at the center of what can or can't happen with North Korea. But what is the advantage to China of a democratically unified Korean peninsula, or disadvantage? I don't know why they would necessarily want that. Secondly of all, why should North Korea want to negotiate? In other words, what is Kim Jong-un and his sister, because she's a big, from what I understand, a big part of what goes on there, decision making. You know, what do they really want? Is it recognition? I'm not clear on that. So from your perspective, you know, I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think China's interest here, I'm just taking them at their word. That may be a mistake, but they say they don't like North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Reunification of the peninsula, in effect, the absorption of the North by the South ends the nuclear weapons program. And look, they've already got a democratic South Korea that's a huge economic power, but a big trading partner of China. And a reunified Korea will be an even bigger economic power and probably even a bigger trading partner with China. So I think, you know, we're really saying to the Chinese, are you serious about what you say or are you not? And I think you have to ask. I mean, I've said what I think the disposition of American forces on the peninsula ought to be. But there may come a time when Americans say, hey, if there's no threat from North Korea, maybe we don't need to be in the Korean peninsula, or maybe Korea decides they don't want Americans there either. I wouldn't like that outcome, but if 20 or 30 years from now that happens as a consequence of eliminating the North Korean nuclear program by eliminating North Korea, I think we could live with that. And in terms of Kim and his sister, I have to say, from my observations, I don't understand that relationship fully, so I'm not going to speculate about it. But I think I am fully prepared to ask China to give them a couple of very nice villas on a great beach somewhere in China, and the U.S. will help pay the cost of their retirement for the rest of their natural lives, and we can make it a really luxurious retirement, just get them out of the country.
But what does China, what's the advantage to China of having control over North Korea versus a unified Korea?
Well, you know, if they fear that both their own nuclear threat, but particularly the North Korean nuclear threat, pushes Japan into getting nuclear weapons, eliminating that possibility, you know, for a long period of time is certainly something I think they ought to be willing to do. You know, I'm sure people on this call know this well. The Japanese have been talking about what it means to be a quote unquote normal nation for 25 or 30 years now. That means a nation that can act in its own self-defense. I think the pacifism clause in the Constitution is hanging by a thread. I've been on Japanese Coast Guard vehicles. They look a lot like American battleships to me. You know, they're on the way there, and notwithstanding Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you cannot put it beyond the realm of possibility that Japan would get nuclear weapons. They've certainly got enough plutonium in spent fuel to make quite a few of them. So this is something I think China should take seriously, and there's a way to put this problem off for a long time.
This is Sung Choi. Your last question.
Hello. Yeah.
Sung
Okay.
Choi, go ahead. Last one.
Sung Choi.
Hi, how are you?
Washington. Mr. Bolton, we were very happy. 2018 June, at the time of the Singapore, two heads of state, Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim Jong-un, they agreed to something basic principle of relation between the two countries. Next year, 2019, we are very unhappy because Hanoi was terminated. And the report said that the national advisor, security advisor, was opposed to any agreement between the North Korea and the United States. Now, we are very unhappy. And today, we'd like to know whether Mr. Bolton has changed your attitude your attitude toward the peace agreement. Because we don't talk about peace agreement, we talk about the unification or continue the war between the U.S. and the North Korea. So please give us your idea. It has nothing to do with the peace agreement. Yes,
Right.
sir.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, look, the question of reunification, I think, is one that should be back at the center of American policy, because I think that's one way to get to the more troubling question of dealing with the nuclear weapons program. What President Moon of South Korea has been talking about, though, is not a peace treaty, but what he has called an end of war declaration. Now, I don't know what that is. I'm not aware there's ever been one before elsewhere in history. I think it's clear we're not ready for a full-up peace treaty between North Korea and the other combatants, which would be the United Nations. That'll be a treat to watch that negotiation. And I thought, and I said this inside in U.S. deliberations, I didn't think the end of war agreement was anything but trouble. That was the best you could say it would have no effect. But I do think there's an argument that acquiescing in an end of war declaration gives North Korea something, a kind of legitimacy for free. So I was prepared to say, let's see if we can negotiate something in Singapore that we said, okay, the war's over. I mean, I don't know what that means, as I say, but I wanted to see what was on offer to get for it. And there wasn't anything. Now, interestingly, Kim Jong-un didn't care about the end of war declaration very much either. It was a Moon Jae-in project. And, I'll leave it to citizens of South Korea to debate that in the context of their upcoming presidential election. I just thought the whole thing was a detour, really an irrelevance to the central issue. And it wasn't much of a factor in either Singapore or Hanoi.
The end of war to the United States is very strange. I mean, United States has never agreed to end the war. Whether U.S. is defeated or United States won in the war, there should be peace agreement. End the war from South Korea is to lead to peace agreement within quickly.
Right.
I mean,
well,
that's the base. Yes, that's a basic basis.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound like a lawyer.
Agreement.
I don't mean to sound like a lawyer, but I can't help myself sometimes. You do that through a negotiated peace agreement, and we did that with Japan in the 1950s. It took a long time. We've got an armistice. We have since 1953. We'd like to end things up with a peace agreement, but we're not ready. And I felt, as I've said, that to do something really unprecedented but intermediate between a state of war, an armistice, and a peace agreement would not be helpful without getting something back from North Korea. And we couldn't seem to get anything back from them, in part because I don't think they were very interested in it either.
Well, Ambassador, this is great. Thank you very much for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, meeting has been adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you all in person soon.
We'll soon.
Take care now.